Hello, I'm Will Poynter,
And I'm Ray Poynter.
and together we're the hosts of Talking AI and the co-founders of ResearchWise AI. And today I'd like to ask Ray a few things about deep research. So to kick us off, Ray, what is deep research?
Okay, so deep research is a relatively new feature on some of the LLMs, for example, ChatGPT, and it's a combination of web search. It's a combination of reasoning, so it uses its thinking model to work through, and it does that to answer usually a non-trivial question from you about tell me about this topic. I want you to do some research so I can start understanding it. It'll go away and it'll come back with a fairly lengthy answer. So 10 pages, 15, 20 pages, this sort of thing. Gives you a good briefing on something.
And you mentioned ChatGPT there. Are there other deep researchers? Do they have different names? Is this the name of a product or the tool?
Well, very luckily, I think they are generally called the same thing. So Gemini's got a deep research, Perplexity has got a deep research, and we're going to see more and more of them coming through. So it's not specific to any one platform, but not all the platforms have it.
Got it. And you've said that the output is longer, but is there anything more you can tell us about the nature of what it produces?
Yeah, so I might ask it to do some research, for example, on the ready to serve coffee market in Japan. And I want to know what are the main brands, who manufacture them, what are the flavors, what is the history. So I'll give it a set of questions like that. It may well then ask me to clarify the questions. ChatGPT always does. It wants to know, okay, are you mainly thinking about this? What sort of time frame? And it'll go away. And it can take quite a long time. It's not unusual for a chat GPT deep research to take 30 minutes. The others tend to be a little bit faster because it's using the reasoning model, it's looking at different sources, it's reading them, then it's going to another source. It's quite typical to come back with references to 20 or 30 sources at the end of it. It'll give you a detailed briefing and then a summary at the end of that. And I would certainly always suggest looking at the summary first to see whether it's gone in the right place because you're talking about a substantial amount of stuff. You don't want to just read it from the beginning to find out if it's going to be useful. So it gives you a great briefing, I find, on for all sorts of different topics.
So that sounds good. It sounds like you've used it quite a lot. Can you give us some examples of where it works well and perhaps any examples you've found, in your explorations of where it doesn't work so well?
I mean, generally, I found it worth my time. It's not great if you're trying to get at something iteratively, because if you're waiting 15 to 20 minutes and it's not quite done what you want, and so you give it a slightly revised spec and it comes back in 15 or 20 minutes, then that is not great. Um, you've got to make sure that the sort of stuff you're looking for is actually out there in the sort of places that it can look. And we'll perhaps have a talk about that when we mention limitations. But it's more of a case sometimes it's not quite as useful. I don't think I've ever come across it not being useful, but maybe it's going to come back with stuff I already know. So if I ask it to do a study, a research into how is AI being used by the market research industry at the moment, there's a good chance it won't add very much to what I already know. So it's most useful when you are really looking into a brand new topic. If somebody comes to me and says, we want to do some research into the London Transport Network, and these are the sort of things we're interested in, then I'm certainly going to use deep research because I don't know that much about the London Transport Network. So the less you know, the more it's likely to be telling you new stuff.
I think that's a great tip. And actually, we were discussing beforehand where we found it useful and less useful. And it's probably true that the case where I found it least useful, it was closest to my area of expertise already. And so, as you explain, if we were doing something with TfL, the London Transport Network, we would perhaps want a crib sheet on that, and this can bring us up to speed. But perhaps it can't do For instance, I'd be interested if you asked it to write a paper on something that you are knowledgeable about, particularly, let's say, I don't know, Bayesian or conjoint analysis or one of these areas, whether it would tell you anything you don't already know.
Um, it probably would, but it wouldn't be labor saving because if it gave me 18 pages back and on page 7 there was something I didn't know, that's not efficient. Um, so that's why I always ask it to finish with a summary because that's going to give me a quick insight into what I should be looking at.
Yeah, and so to build on that, where it can go a bit wrong, or for instance, as you say, the interesting information is on page 7, which is the equivalent of on page 2 of Google, well hidden. What are the other limitations we should look out for with deep research?
So there are two or three really. One of them is that people have sometimes reported it doesn't go to the right sources. So if you were asking stuff about politics, let's say, and you were looking at, I don't know, President Trump, or you're looking at Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, you wouldn't want it to be reading stuff from non-recognized sources, too much out of Reddit, let's say, or something like that. You'd want it to be going to good sources. So you tell it the sort of sources you want to look at, and then you have a look because it gives you a list of everything that it's read and all the citations. So you want to look at that list to make sure that that is credible. But there are lots of places it can't look at. There are lots of websites that say, no, AI bots, you can't come here and read my material. So it's not going to cover the BBC. It's not going to cover the leading newspapers. So if that is what you want, then that is going to be another limitation within that. So you want to take care. And it's probably too verbose. I'm still working at how to get it tighter. And Gemini does seem to be a bit tighter, for example, and Perplexity seems to be a bit tighter than ChatGPT.
Hmm.
So that is another thing we need to be aware of. And then you do need to look at the sources it's quoted to make sure that those are right. And sometimes you're going to want to dive into them for more information anyway.
Yes, absolutely. Although I've not used deep research as much as you have, I use ChatGPT's Canvas more to do an iterative, interactive approach of generating documents. That said, it's because the nature of the documents are quite close to what I need to steer. I have just kicked it off to do a piece of research for me around some existing libraries and techniques, and it's a perfect example of where I don't want to read all the papers around this area of computing, so I want it to do it and summarize it. However, I've got to be aware that it can still hallucinate. It can still read a paper. It can tell it something, and it can completely synthesize it into something else. The famous example. Well, anyway, there's loads of these examples.
Yeah.
Also on limitations, is the Perplexity, ChatGPT, Gemini deep research feature generally available for everyone, or is this a beta release? Do you need a premium account, so on and so forth?
So the way it's limited by and large is how many searches you can do. So most of the free accounts will give you at least one search, two searches a day or a month. And as you start to pay more, you get more searches. And the searches can pull more powerful models into that piece. But you can get started with a free one. Probably my recommendation, because I keep recommending this now to people all in general, is Perplexity, because a free Perplexity account gives you a nice search, a lot of web engine stuff there, and then use that. The general feeling in the industry is this week, the ChatGPT one is the best. We don't know which will be the best one next week.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a very exciting time to be
Yeah.
working alongside AI. So, where do you think this is going to go next? Where is the deep research tool in general, not just the ChatGPT one, going to go?
So I think they're going to get more personalized. So knowing what Ray wants when Ray does a deep research. So this build up of memory, building up of styles, and so on. So that is going to be there. I expect and I hope that we will see task-based deep research. So I might set it up to say, give me a deep research report on the latest polling information in the following countries, and do that at the first Thursday in the month, looking at the previous month. And that would then set up as a task. I could probably just about do that using agents and tasks and pieces at the moment, but I see that coming along as a tool where we could set that up and bring that forward. And then probably linking it to other reporting systems. So maybe it can populate a dashboard. Maybe it can create a short podcast in sort of the Notebook LM sort of style. I think bringing all of that together will be really interesting with deep research. It's one of the clearest ways of using AI as your assistant, because it's exactly the sort of thing you might say to an assistant, go away and get me a briefing on this. I probably use deep research 3 or 4 times a day on the different things. Now, maybe the nature of my work is that I'm looking at new stuff a lot, but I find it incredibly useful.
It probably is an element of the nature of your work, but there is a lot of people whose work is getting up to speed on a topic, and it certainly is very applicable for that. I'm slightly more torn about where it goes. I think it may not emerge as its own distinct tool soon enough. At the moment, it does exist one. Funnily enough, I think it exists as one because of the way that it manages its goal, probably. Realistically, if you were asking, if this was to be your perfect assistant and you need to get up to speed on a topic, you wanted to send you 2 sentences if you need to know 2 sentences, and 8 pages if you need to know 8 pages, or 70 pages if you need to know 70 pages, if this is, a white paper or something else that you need to read. And therefore that is the correct calibration of the goal, and therefore you shouldn't have to frame it as, right, you're going to go do a deep dive. You need to be framing it instead of what you need to know and how you need to know. But that said, this is, it's still very impressive. I think it will just be pulled in as part of your assistant in the future. Sometimes it'll do deep research, sometimes it won't.
Yeah, so I think the concept of the assistant is probably going to be something that will be more clearly defined with the AIs. That at the moment, there are lots of different ways you can use an LLM as your AI assistant, but there isn't really a AI assistant way of doing it. And this is
Exactly.
kind of pulled here. And I think they probably highlighted it because it is web search as opposed to using its existing memory. That also is the explanation for why it takes so much longer, because it doesn't already know it when it starts answering the question. And by calling it deep research, it's made it more knowable. And it's, I think, quite interesting that so many brands are giving it the same name.
Yes.
Unlike something like agents, where we have agents for Copilot, Gems for Gemini, and GPTs for ChatGPT.
And assistants are Hugging Face,
Yeah.
and the list goes on.
So quite interesting that they pulled together the same name here in the way that quite a few of them have with Canvas as well. So I think we're going to see those things as probably they think they're around to stay.
Yeah, I think so. I think yes, I think these things are staying, and thankfully we're lucky that they have all named it correctly. Just for some context for our listeners, for the deep research that I ran earlier and just completed, when Ray was saying how it doesn't use its own knowledge, it searches the web and it can take a bit of time. Mine took 10 minutes. It used 30 sources and performed 178 web searches as part of that. So although I can probably do it in fewer searches, I certainly can't do that number of searches in 10 minutes or anything like it. With that, thank you, Ray. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and join us again for another episode of Talking AI.
Thanks, Will.